Brent Lee, a former conspiracy theorist, logged off after 15 years down the rabbit hole. Now he's on a mission to help others escape the web of misinformation. While the reasons behind his awakening are puzzling, it's a stark reminder that conspiracy theories are infiltrating the mainstream. Lee's story is a testament to the serious consequences of online nonsense. So if you have a friend deep in the conspiracy vortex, maybe it's time for a friendly intervention. After all, the truth is out there, and it's not on some shady message board. This story is from The Guardian and published on October 4th, 2023. What do you think about this, Kelley?
You know what? It actually gives me a lot of hope. I'm glad to see that Mr. Lee changed the way he looked at the world. And then that's what he did. He completely changed the way he looked at the world. Apparently, some people can get better. And that's one of the reasons we do this show, right? So it gives me hope that we're not all wasting our time. It's awesome. This group of people who believe in this kind of stuff, it's not a small group of people, and we really need to be aware of that. Currently, 15 to 17% of Americans claim to be followers of QAnon. Just using the smaller number of 15% of the overall population, that would mean there's nearly 50 million people who believe in QAnon. I'm going to say that again. 50 million people in the USA believe the things that QAnon says are real. To put that into perspective, the combined populations of Chicago, LA, and New York City is only 18 million, less than half of the QAnon believers in the US. I honestly don't know that there's one single thing that we can say to help people out of this kind of a thinking. I have a little bit more that I'd like to say on this, but I want to pass it over to the cross-examiner because I really love listening to him talk. This has been a great episode. I've been really enjoying
Me too.
it. Yeah.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I love hearing your views too, and I agree with you. The thing that spoke to me is I really liked this story. The thing that spoke to me is the author of the story kept pushing this person for why did you start believing or why did you stop believing? And the person was really like, I don't know. Like at some point he just decided enough was enough, and at some point he became convinced. And it's a great demonstration that there is no single reason that people believe things. It's not a simple formula. It's a complicated mashup of emotions, past experiences, information you've been presented with, media consumption, friendships, psychology, a whole bunch of things. I found this particular piece of the story interesting when the reporter is pressing him as to what started you down this path. He finally says, one point I really remember is learning that George W. Bush and John Kerry, two politicians on opposite sides of the aisle, were both members of an organization, a secret society, so to speak, at Yale, not so secret because everybody knows about it, called Skull and Bones. And he explains that this fact led him to believe that they were evil politicians interested in satanic rituals. It doesn't say why. I think it's just because the name, Skull and Bones. So, but at the end of that segment, he says something very instructive. He says, quote, once you've been swayed by these arguments, it's easy to just keep going down the rabbit hole, finding more dots to connect. Once you have such a skewed view of the world, you can be convinced of other stuff. And that really speaks to what we do as advocates for keeping religion out of government and secular humanism and all of the things we might advocate for. It supports my sort of hypothesis I'm working on, that if you're raised to believe that reality, that facts come from a authority figure that dictates them, or a book that dictates them, a single source, your brain gets trained at an early age to accept all sorts of things. And he's sort of confirming that here. What are your thoughts, Phoebe?
I don't like this article because it reminds me too much of myself and my old lunatic, round the bend self. I mean, I've come a long way from not necessarily believing conspiracy junk, but I've believed a lot of junk in my life. And I mean, it's one of those things that I read the article and I go, this article could very easily, if with a slightly different skew, have been about me and who I used to be, and the zealot and the lunatic and the madness of the things that I used to hold to be true. And reading the article was quite difficult for me at points, because it was one of those things where I could see the parallels of where I had been, and I could see the parallels of how I had fallen into these things. I mean, some of the things I didn't believe in. I've always believed we've landed on the moon, and we got Mythbusters to thank for that one, because they decided that they were going to go, oh yeah, how wonderful, and they proved that no, it was not this, that, and the other on some set somewhere, and didn't believe all some of the weirder and more colourful conspiracy theories. But it is very easy for anybody to go down this path. I've been down paths of complete nonsense. And the biggest takeaway that I took from this was that he wanted it to be made clear to every person reading this article that it could happen to you if you're not careful. And you yourself have to make sure that you don't allow yourself to become what he was in the article. 15 years, he said, he spent going down rabbit holes following white rabbits. And I think the biggest reason he did the article, the biggest takeaway that he had from the article was, don't be like me. It's not a good thing for you to go off and do, is it, Jonathan?
No. What I can say about this is that I am happy for him. I applaud his success in getting out of an obviously bad place. You know, he had mentioned that, or the writer of the article had mentioned that he may have wasted his young life and did not start a family or do other activities while only talking to fellow delusional people. He has an appropriate shame and cringe reaction to his hearing his prior ridiculous beliefs. When hearing them, he, has a bad reaction to them, which I can imagine only how I would react to that, which is the same way. I would have crawled into a hole and pulled it in after me, so I applaud his courage in coming out and saying, yeah, I believe this junk, I wasted my time on all this bovine feces. His attempts to steer others out of that quagmire, apparently he has a very reasonable approach and talks to them not like somebody who's trying to show them that they are stupid, but somebody who's been there and has that experience. Reminds me in the VA, they have peer counselors who do the same thing. And it's a much better results. Though he admits he has mixed results on it, maybe he will one day get that dialed in enough to help more people. And I totally encourage that. That is a perfectly legitimate reaction to his disgust for it. And I just think that that he's going in the right direction. There are some takeaways, from this, that after the 9/11 attacks, to get a healthy skepticism, which we don't teach very much anymore. It really is, how you find this stuff is you have a healthy skepticism about government and government motives. We found again that that's been validated time and time again. Then after the 9/11 attacks, you download some articles that claim that it was a government-run false flag operation to justify a war. And that doesn't seem too unplausible. Then he finds out about the Skull and Bones Society. So it's not that one side or the other is bad; it's that they both are, right? It's a brotherhood of. It's called the Order or Order 322, or the Brotherhood of Death, is what this is called, and it's a Yale University undergraduate senior student body society. So it's like, okay, these people are around, and he's probably heard bad things about the Masons and everything else. So it's like you start connecting these dots, and the political elites are interested in morbid rituals from the Brotherhood of Death. Just the names alone, it's not a far leap at that point that they're all pedophile, cannibalistic, Satanist elites ruling the world. Those dots connect in that kind of warped worldview, that warped information place, and down the rabbit hole you go. And I believed in some pretty strange things in my life coming up, and I can see how you can get hooked into these things, and it's not fun to get out of them. But
Mulder and Scully eat your heart out.
Yeah, right. The education system does not really teach anymore. They did when I was going to school, the basics of how the government works. But he sees on the internet stuff that contradicts that. So the basics of critical thinking and skepticism are missing in the education of most people nowadays, unless they go to college and study something like I did, political science, where it's kind of required, in most of what you do, because a lot of political science majors are going to law school after they leave undergraduate work. So you get a lot of the education that people don't normally get in high school, which they should. And other than that, I think I'm very sad at the state of QAnon. Apparently, there are a couple of places now that are online for, it's called, one of them is QAnon Casualties, a Reddit community for those impacted by QAnon and former believers. It has grown to include 158,000 members since it was created in July of 2019. They also have Recovery with a Q, another Reddit support group that has started this year and has 9,300 members in less than a year that it's been active. So there are positive signs. And so with that, I'm going to turn this over to Kelley.
That is positive, but adding those together, that's 167,000 out of 50 million. So it's a great step in the right direction, but we got to start making bigger strides, right?
Yeah.
Should ask it on the next census. Did you ever believed in QAnon?
Yeah. Like I said earlier, I don't think there's one single way to get through to all 50 million of the people. But one thing I have noticed is that arguing with them, it doesn't work. It just makes them dig in deeper. So if you know someone who's in this predicament, you want to help them get out of it, don't argue with them. Instead, show them all the puzzle pieces, put them all together in a line for them, but let them put them all together. Because if they figure it out on their own, it's going to go a lot farther than you telling them all day long. So let them figure it out. Socratic method, street epistemology are both often good types of an approach to go for this. But what I'm wondering is there something that we, right here on the panel, and I want to put this to the panel, can do to help facilitate waking people like Brent Lee up? And do we really have an obligation to try to do it? So what do you think, Cross-Examiner?
Absolutely. I'm going to jump to a section of notes I made about this exact issue. I'm glad you asked about it. So there was a documentary several years ago called something along the lines of, I think it's The Brainwashing of My Father. I highly recommend people watch this documentary. The filmmaker describes how her father was a wonderful person who loved everybody, was popular with everyone in the neighborhood, but he worked as a driver. And this was in the era of talk radio, the height of AM conservative talk radio, Rush Limbaugh times, right? And he took this job as a driver, and she describes talk radio as being this, it's so personal. It's you and this speaker for hours listening to this stuff. And if you've ever listened to Rush Limbaugh, I remember the first time I heard him, it was, he made point A, and I'm like, yeah, I agree with that. Point B, yeah, I kind of agree with that. And then he made point C, which was 8-mile leap of no logic. And I was like, what the hell's going on here? But apparently some people sort of stick with him. So she describes her father turning into this mean, negative, bigoted miserable person. And the way they got him out of it, this documentary sort of covers this, is she and her mother and his friends sort of conspired. I'm not saying you need to make it a conspiracy, but he was watching Fox News exclusively, all of that stuff. She conspired because he was getting older, so he wasn't familiar with technology. She canceled the cable service so he couldn't watch Fox News. She monitored his emails to exclude the conspiracy emails from the radical family members, and kept up at it for a year. And she documented how her father started moderating his views again. It's astounding to see this, how, exposure to this authority figure, again, Fox News, Rush Limbaugh dictating facts at you, made him go one way, and then taking him out of it made him go the other way. I don't know if you have any exposure or similar stories, Phoebe, of people that have sort of come out of this.
Well, not stories of other people, but, well, as I said earlier, me. I mean, I was right in the right-wing loony bin at one point. I was an horrific human being. I used to believe some horrendous things. I was a member of an horrific organization, when you think about it. Not anything violent or anything, but, I look back at it and I go, the views they were expounding were awful. And getting out of that is the hardest thing, because you have a community there. You have someone that you can identify with. You can see somebody in you, and you can see you in somebody. And that's what you got to separate out from, because you started to blend what is reality and what is fiction into one, and you got to start to separate that back out again. I mean, some of the conspiracies that come around with these things are absolutely absurd. I mean, I once heard somebody with a straight face tell me that Tory Belleci from Mythbusters and the White Rabbit Project was Q, because he was once on a show called The White Rabbit Project. Q must be a man, and the other male host is dead. So it must be Tory Belleci that is Q.
I mean,
that makes sense to me.
Can you prove that he's not?
Well,
yeah, right.
Well, there you go. But that was a genuine belief that Tory Belleci, because he was on a show called The White Rabbit Project, and he was the only living male host left, was Q. I mean,
amazing.
That's not as crazy as RFK Jr. still alive, or JFK
True.
Jr. still alive, right? I mean, It's really not. I mean,
Yeah.
John, you have something you want to add to it?
Just real quick, I think there was an experiment done, and I don't know who did it, where they paid people to not watch anything but CNN for a week, these ultra-right conservatives, for 2 weeks, I think. And after a fortnight, these people changed their views completely around. So it's like, yeah, you can do that. This actually works if you can manage to get them to, to just watch one other thing other than their particular news, news station, not just Fox News. There's a couple of other ones who've sprung up since, but yeah, so there are ways you can do this. And I'm going to pass it back to you, Kelley.
Well, I don't have much to add to it. I think we'll wrap it up there. If you're not just hanging out, dear viewer, and you want to check out some cool stuff, go to tiny.cc/ACA merch, because there's all kinds of cool stuff there. And if you want more from the nonprofits, you can find it right here.